You went on to abuse the corpses of these 3 victims. You stripped them from the waist down. You folded them in half, binding them so that their feet were up by their ears.
This is the busy metropolis of East Cleveland, Ohio, a city where the chances of being a victim of violence or theft are 1 in 30. But to make things even worse, a notorious serial killer was on the loose, one with a sick obsession for black women, as the community currently struggles to overcome the hurt that he has caused. The question of other unknown and undiscovered victims looms large. Born in this city on October 15, 1977, Michael Madison is an American convicted serial killer and sex offender. But before we get to his serial killing crimes, let us delve into his past. His mother, Diane Madison, suffered at the hands of a number of abusive boyfriends and did not intend to birth a child into the kind of life that she lived. Michael was simply the product of an accidental pregnancy. After she discovered that she was with the child, she confronted her boyfriend at the time, Baldwin, about it. He denied ownership and didn't want any form of contact with the young woman, leaving her to raise the child on her own. Diane became an abusive mother to her son, venting all her anger and frustration on the young boy. This was most likely the start of his hatred and animosity towards black women. The string of terrible boyfriends and abusive relationships never ended for Diane, even after the birth of her son. Reports revealed that she heavily abused drugs and gave into prostitution, which led to multiple male visitors, all posing as temporary father figures to the young boy. On more than one occasion, these men would punish Michael and his older half-brother, Grant. And even after those men left, the brothers weren't safe from the heinous things their mother would do to them, Michael being the chief victim of her assaults. According to Grant, in 1980, when Michael was only 2 years old, Diane did all sorts of atrocious acts to him, which included stuffing food into his mouth, beating him up with an extension cord, and throwing him into a bath of scalding hot water. Later that year, Child and Family Services were called to their home by neighbors and friends who had witnessed the brutal treatment the children were receiving from their mother. Reports say that Michael had a large bruise on his forehead, which required treatment at the local hospital, amid several other cuts and injuries he sustained while being flogged by her, usually with the thick extension cord. At age 3, one of Madison's boyfriends beat Michael so much that he had to be hospitalized, and another time, he was hit in the head and lost hearing in one ear. It was at this point that social workers got involved. They reported that Michael suffered contusions and abrasions and had an abnormal swelling on the shaft of his reproductive organ. This finally led to the child being removed from his mother's care into his grandmother's, who wasn't much different from his mom. She was a former prostitute and heroin addict, and neglected the young child so much that in 1982, a few months after Michael was brought into her care, he was hospitalized for extreme dehydration and starvation. This forced DCS, Department of Child Safety, to return the child back to his mother, although the situation of abuse never changed. During routine checks, they found scratches and bruises on Michael's body, all incurred during the fights he had trying to escape his mother's beatings. Finally, at age 16, Michael left the care of his family and would go around sleeping anywhere he could, anywhere but home. On July 19, 2013, police responded to reports of a foul odor emanating from a garage belonging to 36-year-old Michael Madison in East Cleveland. After they got a search warrant to check the property, they made a shocking discovery. The dilapidating bodies of Madison's victims were later identified as Sherelda Terry, Angela Deskins, and Shatisha Sheely.
Within 2 hours, a suspect had been identified, a search warrant obtained and executed on Chickasaw Avenue in the city of Cleveland.
This led to Madison's arrest, who was located by the officers at his mother's residence. He initially resisted arrest, and there was a brief standoff before police officers took him into their custody.
The suspect was apprehended without injury and without further loss of life. Upon bringing the suspect into custody, and further questioning by East Cleveland Police detectives, FBI, BCI, and Cleveland Police, it was determined that it was necessary to do an additional canvass on Saturday, the next day.
One of his victims, 28-year-old Shatisha, was the mother of a 12-year-old daughter. On the night that she was reported missing, Shatisha called her mother and said that she was stopping by to borrow some money from her, but never showed up.
I don't know why this person did what they did to my daughter, but I just want everybody just to pray for me, because this is really, really hard on me right now.
The family grew more agitated when her brother was shot and killed in a home invasion, and Shatisha never showed up to the funeral. At that point, her mother filed a missing persons report, although she never got any feedback from the station, not until the alarming find of her daughter's dead and decaying body.
My son just was murdered 7 months ago, exactly on the 22nd. And it's really hard. It's taking a toll out of me. I don't know what else to say, but thank y'all for whoever is praying for me. Oh.
Soon after the bodies were discovered, they were taken in for forensics, and it was then that they were all identified and the families of the victims informed. 38-year-old Angela Deskins, on the other hand, a self-employed woman working in customer service, was reported missing on July 7, 2013, by her family and friends. Since the young lady was self-employed and worked from home, it became puzzling when no one knew her whereabouts. Madison's last victim was Terry Angela, who was only 18 years old, and was a college student working a part-time job. She went missing after work one summer evening, and a few days later, her father plastered the streets with missing posters of Angela. Reports from Michael Madison's neighbors are what finally led to his arrest. When officers arrived at the scene, they found the dead body of a woman in a fetal position, wrapped in layers and layers of trash bags. Michael was not in the house when the search went down.
That brings us to today, where shortly we will file charges of aggravated murder against Michael Madison, the suspect we have in custody. 1 count of aggravated murder in the death of Angela Deskins, who has been identified, previously known as victim number 2, discovered by the East Cleveland Police, BCI, and FBI on Saturday. Angela Deskins was a resident of Cleveland. Angela Deskins was believed to be 38 years old.
So the officers drove to his mother's house a few blocks off to arrest him. He gave the officers a hard time, but he was outnumbered and finally cuffed. Fearing that these 3 weren't the only victims of murder, police involved the Cleveland community in a further search around the neighborhood, during which they discovered more bodies. However, they could not be tied to the suspect without proof or a confession. On July 22, 2013, Madison was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 3 counts of kidnapping and gross abuse to a corpse, rape, and weapons possession. His bail was set at $6 million, but eventually denied, although the Supreme Court unanimously upheld the death penalty for him.
Upon consideration of the relevant evidence, the testimony exhibits admitted in mitigation, it is the judgment of this court that the aggravated circumstances of course of conduct, felony murder kidnapping, felony murder rape, of which the defendant was convicted, outweigh the mitigating factors by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Accordingly, the sentence of death is imposed upon the defendant Michael Madison on counts 1, 4, and 7.
He later admitted to choking one of his victims to death in October 2012, and shortly left her in his apartment while he went out drinking. Madison also stated that he did not remember killing his other 2 victims, but he did recall waking up next to one of the women's dead bodies, which he later placed in the garage behind his house. Madison's defense attorney did not argue that he was innocent, but brought 20 concerns on appeal, alleging that defective trial procedures denied him the right to a life term in prison. Justice R. Patrick DeWine eventually wrote for the court, concluding that the evidence did not support Madison's assertions of errors and bias. The court concluded that Madison's death sentences were warranted for 3 murders perpetrated over a 9-month period, as well as kidnapping and raping one of the victims. The evidence overwhelmingly supported the course of conduct specifications for 3 aggravated murder convictions. During the hearing, the father of Michael's final victim, Van Terry, was asked by the court to speak about his family's loss and how they were handling the grief. He addressed the judge saying, "I guess we are supposed to find it in our hearts to forgive this clown who has taken my child." Mr. Terry then stopped in his statement before suddenly climbing over the defense table and attacking Madison, who appeared to smirk as Mr. Terry read his statement.
Right now, I guess we're supposed to, in our hearts, forgive this clown who's touched our families, taken my child.
Panic alarms were triggered in the Cuyahoga County Justice Center in Cleveland when Terry managed to hold Madison's face and throat, following which Madison received the death sentence. Madison was spotted giggling while the sheriff's deputies wrestled Mr. Terry to the ground. In that brief moment, the courtroom exploded into mayhem as someone in the gallery shouted, "No!" East Cleveland serial killer Michael Madison has his execution date postponed. The Ohio Supreme Court's decision to sustain Madison's death sentence in 2020 was a big move, but as of March 2024, his case has taken a drastic turn since its reopening. For 4 years now, the families of the victims have been ardently lobbying for the death penalty, driven by their long-standing grief and desire for justice. The execution date, initially scheduled for May 15, 2024, was established when the Supreme Court upheld Madison's sentence in 2020. However, issues have now emerged because the county's sentencing statutes do not include a death penalty option. Families and friends of the victims are still on standby, waiting for an update on the case. Can justice really be served for the victims and their loved ones?